Here we have symbolization 398. If there is no one who does not read the Daily Bruin in class, then only the inconsiderate are literate. This is a hard sentence to understand because this no one who does not read the Daily Bruin, and then only the inconsiderate are literate. But we can break it down piece by piece. And the first thing we need to see is that, as with the previous problems, the if then is the main connective, because we have that this is inside between the if and the then. There's no one who does not read the Daily Bruin in class. That's a sentence. And then we have only the inconsiderate are literate, and that's another sentence. So if we remove the if then, we're left with two sentences, and that means the if then passes the removal test, and there's nothing else that does, so the if then is the main connective. So antecedent, there is no one who does not read the Daily Bruin in class. Consequent, only the inconsiderate are literate. So there is no one who does not read the Daily Bruin in class. So that's just, we can simplify that to no one does not read the Daily Bruin in class. So if we look at this again, this is hard to read because of the double negation, but if we stick with our determinative phrase verb phrase method, we're going to be okay, because we can say this is the determinative phrase, no one, and this is the verb phrase, does not read the Daily Bruin in class. So this is the negation, this no, right, of someone does not read the Daily Bruin in class. So now we have an excess. This is we again have this as our determinative phrase, and that's our verb phrase. And the determinative phrase has the some and the one. Here, one is being used as a dummy noun phrase, so we're not going to symbolize it. So we really just have an existential something. What? This does not read the Daily Bruin in class. Now, it's important to see what, well, actually, I'm just going to keep going, and then I'm going to come back and make a comment on this. So we have X does not read the Daily Bruin in class. So that's a negation of X reads the Daily Bruin in class. And then that's atomic Fx. Now, note that there are two negations here. There's this negation, there's this negation, and there's right there, and there's that negation right there. This negation comes from this no, and the second negation comes from the not. And we need to keep those separate. We need to say one of those negations is part of the determinative phrase, and the other negation is part of the verb phrase. And so they each need to be symbolized in the appropriate place. So this no gets symbolized when we're putting on the right before and in anticipation of putting on the existential quantifier. The no really gives us this negation and this existential. And then the not, this not in the verb phrase here gets then symbolized there, turning into a negation there. So we need to keep track of both of those, and they need to go in the right place. And while they are a double negation, one's on the inside of the existential quantifier, and one's on the outside of the existential quantifier. What that means is that this says everything. So this says, so what do you like if you're like this? You don't read the Daily Bruin in class. So this says there's something that does read, that there's something that doesn't read the Daily Bruin. There's something that doesn't read the DB. Let's just say there's something that doesn't read. And so this says, so then the whole thing says, is there something that doesn't read? No, there's not something that doesn't read. But what does that mean? It means that everything does read. So we need to distinguish, in other words, between that and this. This is a double negation, so those are superfluous, and this is something does read. This is not, what I'm doing here is not the symbolization of this. I want to contrast this, this sentence with this sentence for a second. So this says, it's not the case that something reads. And that's just equivalent to, actually, let's do it like this. And then we'll do this. And we'll do that, and we'll do that. And we can, actually, no, let's do this slightly differently. Okay, so we have something is F. So something reads, and that's equivalent to this. It's not the case. That is not the case that something reads. In this case, these two negations are superfluous, and so these two things are the same. Now let's compare this sentence with this sentence. So here we have one negation outside the existential and one negation inside the existential, unlike in this case. And if we think about our QN rules, right, this negation can move outside, this negation can move outside of the existential, but then it turns the existential into a universal. And then you eliminate both the negations and you get this. So this is the same thing as that, which is not the same thing as that. So there's a big difference between this and this, because this is equivalent to that, whereas this is equivalent to that. So these two do not say the same thing. This says something is F, and this says everything is F, because it says, is there something that isn't F? No, there's nothing like that. There's not a single thing that is un-F. So if there's nothing is un-F, then everything is F. So you need to keep track of both of this negation and this negation, and they have to not only keep track of them, symbolize both of them, but they have to be symbolized in the right place. This negation is part of the determiner phrase, and so is hooked up with the quantifier. This negation is part of the verb phrase, and so is symbolized within the scope of the quantifier. So we come over here and we look at only the inconsiderate are literate. And does this say, if you're inconsiderate, then you're literate? No, because it doesn't say all inconsiderate people are literate. It says only things like this, only things like this are also like this. So if the only way to get around to being literate is also by being inconsiderate. So this is a universal, and it's a restricted universal. So we symbolize the verb phrase there, because this is the opposite of a all sentence. So we'll have the verb phrase is X is literate, and then we can say X is inconsiderate. X is literate, that's HX, and X is inconsiderate, that's GX, and there we go. So when you think about it this way, what this sentence says is the only way that you could have become literate is by also being inconsiderate. There are maybe people who are inconsiderate who aren't literate, but the only way to get to be literate is by also being inconsiderate. So that's what that sentence says.